Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Maple Grove Scripture Reading Podcast. So, as you know, we've been working through the book of Job, going verse by verse. And right now, we're in chapter 31, which is Job's final defense. He's finished arguing with Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar, and that conversation has run its course. And now Job has pivoted. He's really making his case directly to God. He's not asking for sympathy, but he is demanding a hearing. And the way he structures this chapter is through a series of oaths, what you could call self-imprecatory oaths. He lays out a list of serious moral failures and says, if I've done any of these things, well, here's the judgment I deserve. It's very legal language. It's the language of a man who puts himself on the stand and says, test me. The structure throughout is, if I've done this, then let this happen to me. So he's inviting accountability, and he's so confident in his integrity that he's willing to call down punishment on himself as proof. So in our last episode, we were in the first 8 verses, and Job opened the chapter with that striking statement about making a covenant with his eyes, a commitment not to let his gaze linger where it should not, because he knows that God sees his every step and his every motive. And then he moved into the oath framework. He said, if I've walked in falsehood, if I've chased after worthless things, then let others eat what I've sown. The framework gets established there. He's putting himself on the record. He's told the court exactly what stakes he's willing to accept. But today we're going to be in verses 9 through 12. And this oath that we're going to read today is about adultery. So let me go through it. If my heart has been enticed by a woman, or if I have lurked at my neighbor's door, then may my wife grind another man's grain, and may other men sleep with her. For that would have been wicked, a sin to be judged. It is a fire that burns to destruction. It would have uprooted my harvest. All right, it doesn't start with the act, it starts with the heart. Job says his heart has never been enticed by a woman. The Hebrew word carries the sense of being opened up or led somewhere, a heart that's been seduced toward something that it shouldn't want. And then the image that follows is very specific. It's lurking at a neighbor's door, waiting for the husband to leave, watching for the moment when the coast is clear. So that's not stumbling into anything. It's a desire that's been given room to plant. It's premeditated longing. Job's claim isn't just that he never acted on it. He's saying his heart wasn't even doing that. No cultivated desire, no watching from the shadows, no calculating the opportunity. It's a harder claim to make than I never had an affair, and Job knows that. He's already said back in verse 4 that God counts every step. He understands that God doesn't just see what you do, he sees what you want to do. So the oath covers both, the act and the interior movement toward it. And it connects directly back to what we read last time, the covenant with his eyes. That was the firewall that he built at the point of seeing. This oath is about what happens when that firewall comes down. The heart gets enticed, and enticed heart starts to lurk. And it's not a long distance from, well, I'll just let myself look, to I'm waiting at the door. Job sees that connection clearly. He's not splitting the moral life into acceptable thoughts and unacceptable actions. He's holding them together. There's something in Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount that lands the same way. The man who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in his heart. That's Matthew 5. Job is centuries earlier, but he's working from the same understanding how this works. The heart is where it starts. That's where the oath has to reach. Now, the NIV doesn't soften verse 10. May my wife grind another man's grain, and may other men sleep with her. That's the imprecatory sanction, the punishment Job is calling down on himself if he's lying. In the ancient world, grinding grain was the work of slaves and concubines, the lowest rung of the social order. It was humiliating labor, and the way the NIV renders verse 10 makes it plain that the humiliation goes beyond the labor. He's saying, if I violated my neighbor's wife, then let my wife be handed over to another man. Let what I would have stolen from him be taken from me. Now, that's brutal, and it's supposed to be. The punishment mirrors the crime exactly. He would have violated someone's household, so let his household be violated. He would have sinned against a neighbor's wife, so let his wife be given to another. There's no softening, no hedge, no appeal for mercy if it turns out that he's wrong. He's naming the full weight of the consequence, and he's saying, this is what I accept. That's the proof. And that takes either recklessness or a completely clean conscience. Given everything we know about Job, a man God himself called blameless and upright, who's held on to his integrity through everything he's lost, it reads as the latter. Now, verse 11 simply calls it wicked, a sin to be judged. In the ancient world, adultery wasn't treated as a purely private moral failure between two people. It had legal standing. It was the kind of offense that courts took up and punished. Job is acknowledging that here, not just saying this would be a sin before God, but something serious enough for civil judgment. What sticks with me in this section is kind of the framing of it. Every element of this oath is structured around a neighbor, his heart enticed toward a woman, lurking at his neighbor's door. The curse he accepts involves his wife being treated the way he would have treated another man's wife. The whole picture is relational and social, so the wrong isn't just between Job and God, it's between Job and the man next door, the man whose household and wife and trust Job would have violated. There's a neighbor in this picture, a specific person whose life gets wrecked when this happens. We don't usually talk about sexual sin in those terms. The conversation today tends to be more personal. It's my struggle, my purity, my choices. Job's framing of this is wider. He's thinking about what you owe the person whose door you walk past every day. Adultery in his accounting is a theft from a neighbor. And the reckoning in this oath is mutual. What I would have taken from him, I'm willing to have taken from me. It's also worth noting that Job doesn't frame this primarily as a violation of his own marriage. He gets to that implicitly through the curse in verse 10, but the way the oath is constructed, lurking at a neighbor's door, sinning against the neighbor's household, puts the neighbor at the center. The person wronged isn't just Job's own family, it's the man next to him. That's a social and ethical seriousness about sexual sin that we don't often hear much about today, and Job is assuming it without argument, as though it's obvious. Now, verse 12 reaches for a different kind of language entirely. He calls it a fire that burns to destruction. In the NIV, that word destruction is capitalized. It's translating the Hebrew word Abaddon, or the abyss, the deep place of ruin. We've heard Abaddon mentioned earlier in Job. It's always associated with the place of no return, like the deepest level of the grave where you can't come back from. And Job is saying this sin doesn't just damage things, it burns down to that level. And then it would have uprooted his harvest. That's a very precise image. Not ruined my life in some general sense, but uprooted his harvest, the thing he planted, tended, and was about to bring in. The accumulated result of his labor and his years, gone. Not just singed, but pulled up at the root. And fire behaves that way sometimes. You can watch fuel burn and think the damage is just what you can see, what's on the surface, the stalks, the ground cover. But if the fire gets down into the root system, field doesn't come back the next season. The roots are what sustain everything above the ground. And once they're gone, rain's not going to fix it. That's the picture that Job's drawing. Adultery as a fire doesn't just stay on the surface. It goes down. It gets into the roots of a household and a life and a legacy. And what burns there doesn't grow back. He knows what that fire does, and he's staking himself to the claim that he didn't start it. So 4 verses, but look at what's on the table here. Job has claimed that his heart never moved toward another woman, not in desire, not in premeditation, not in action. He's accepted humiliating consequences if he's wrong. He's described the depth of destruction this sin brings, named the place it burns to, and stood directly in front of all of it. And he hasn't flinched. This is a man making a legal case before God himself. The friends have stopped listening. The witnesses are gone. But God sees every step, counts every motive. Job has said so himself, which is why he's willing to put all of this on the record. If you really believe God sees everything, like really truly believe that, then this kind of oath isn't reckless. It's just the only honest move left. All right, next time we're going to look at verses 13 through 23, which is going to be the longest section of the chapter. And Job is going to turn outward, away from his own marriage and household, and he starts talking about the people around him who had no power, servants, the poor, the widow, the fatherless, and he's going to look at how he treated them. whether his integrity extended to people who couldn't fight back. So we'll look at that next time. All right, hope you have a great day. We'll talk again soon. God bless.